Commander Sarah Mitchell stood at attention in the briefing room of Naval Special Warfare Command, her dress blues crisp and perfectly pressed. At 28, she was one of the youngest officers to hold such a position, but her record spoke for itself. 3 tours in Afghanistan, countless successful operations, and a reputation that preceded her wherever she went. Today, however, she felt the familiar weight of being underestimated simply because she was a woman in a male-dominated field. Admiral Robert Hayes entered the room with the swagger that came from 30 years of naval service. He was a legend in his own right, a former SEAL who had climbed the ranks to become one of the most respected leaders in the special operations community. His salt-and-pepper beard and weathered face told stories of countless missions in hostile territories. Behind him walked his aide, Lieutenant Commander Brooks, and several other senior officers who would be part of today's strategic planning session. Sarah had heard the stories about Admiral Hayes. He was known for his sharp wit, his demanding standards, and his old-school approach to leadership. Some called him brilliant, others called him difficult. What everyone agreed on was that he didn't suffer fools gladly and had little patience for what he perceived as political correctness in the military. As the briefing began, Sarah presented her analysis of recent intelligence reports from the Middle East. She had spent weeks preparing this presentation, knowing that her recommendations could influence major operational decisions. Her voice was steady and confident as she outlined potential targets and strategic approaches, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Admiral Hayes was studying her more than listening to her words. "Commander Mitchell," the Admiral interrupted halfway through her presentation, his voice carrying that particular tone that suggested he was about to say something he found amusing. "I have to ask, how exactly did someone of your experience level end up in this position? I mean, you look like you should be teaching elementary school somewhere in Iowa, not briefing admirals on special operations." The room fell silent. Sarah felt the familiar burn of frustration rise in her chest, but her expression remained neutral. She had dealt with comments like this her entire career, from drill instructors who thought she was too soft for boot camp to fellow officers who assumed she had received special treatment because of her gender. Each time, she had proven them wrong through her actions, not her words. "Sir, I believe my record speaks for itself," Sarah replied evenly. 3 combat deployments, 74 successful operations, and a perfect mission completion rate. I've earned my position through the same standards applied to every other officer in this command. Admiral Hayes chuckled, and several of the other officers exchanged glances. "Oh, I'm sure you've followed all the right procedures, Commander. Checked all the right boxes. But this isn't about paperwork and performance reviews. This is about real combat experience. This is about knowing what it's like to look down the barrel of a rifle at another human being and make the hardest decision a person can make." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure. "With respect, sir, I believe you may be making assumptions about my background based on incomplete information." "Assumptions?" The Admiral leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying what he perceived as his upper hand in this exchange. "Commander, I've been doing this since before you were born. I can spot a desk jockey from a mile away. You've got that look of someone who's spent more time in air-conditioned offices than in the field. Nothing wrong with that, mind you. The Navy needs good administrators. But let's not pretend that qualifies you to advise on special operations." The other officers in the room shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant Commander Brooks cleared his throat softly, perhaps sensing that his superior was crossing a line, but Admiral Hayes seemed oblivious to the tension he was creating. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had 2 choices: she could continue to defend herself with words, allowing this to become a prolonged verbal sparring match that would accomplish nothing, or she could take a different approach. She thought about her mentor, Colonel Maria Santos, who had once told her that sometimes the best way to handle a bully was to show them exactly who they were dealing with. "Admiral Hayes," Sarah said, her voice taking on a different quality, something harder and more direct. "You're absolutely right that this job requires real combat experience. It requires someone who understands the weight of life and death decisions. Someone who knows what it means to take a life in service of their country and their fellow warriors." "Exactly my point," the Admiral said with satisfaction, clearly thinking he had made his case. Which is why, Sarah continued, rolling up the sleeve of her dress uniform, I thought you might want to see this. The room seemed to freeze as Sarah revealed her forearm. There, in stark black ink against her pale skin, was a tattoo that made Admiral Hayes's confident smirk disappear instantly. It was a simple design, but one that carried profound meaning in the special operations community, a crosshair symbol with the number 47 beneath it. Admiral Hayes stared at the tattoo, his face going pale. In the special operations world, certain tattoos were more than decoration, they were records, testimonies to actions taken in the line of duty. The crosshair symbol was known among those who had served in the most elite units, and the number beneath it represented something that few people ever had to confront. That's... The Admiral began, his voice trailing off as the implications hit him. 47 confirmed kills, Sarah said quietly, her voice steady but carrying a weight that filled the room. 47 human beings who died because I was better at my job than they were at theirs. 47 families somewhere who don't know what happened to their sons, their fathers, their brothers. Each number represents a moment when I looked through a scope, calculated wind speed and distance, controlled my breathing, and squeezed a trigger. The silence in the room was deafening. Admiral Hayes, who moments before had been confident and joking, now looked as though he had been struck. The other officers stared in shock, suddenly understanding that they were in the presence of someone whose experience went far beyond what any of them had imagined. Sarah slowly rolled her sleeve back down, her movements deliberate and controlled. I don't talk about this part of my service, Admiral. Not because I'm ashamed of it, but because it's not something you use to win arguments or proof points. Every person I killed was trying to kill American soldiers, American allies, or innocent civilians. Every shot I took was authorized, necessary, and precise. But that doesn't make it easy to live with. Admiral Hayes seemed to be struggling to find his voice. The man who had entered the room with such confidence and authority now looked smaller somehow, humbled by the revelation of what the young woman standing before him had actually experienced. I became a sniper, Sarah continued, because I was the best shot in my unit. I stayed a sniper because I was good at it, and because being good at it meant that other people got to go home to their families. I took this desk job because after 6 years of combat operations, I wanted to use my experience to help plan missions that would be successful with minimal casualties. Not because I couldn't handle the field anymore, but because I thought I could do more good here. The Admiral finally found his voice, though it was considerably quieter than it had been earlier. Commander, I had no idea. Your file didn't indicate. My file contains everything that's necessary for you to know about my qualifications, Sarah interrupted, her tone still professional but with an edge that hadn't been there before. The details of my combat operations are classified at levels above what most people in this room have clearance to access. That includes the specific nature of my role in those operations. Lieutenant Commander Brooks shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the room. The other officers seemed frozen, unsure how to react to what they had just witnessed. It wasn't often that an admiral was so thoroughly put in his place, especially by a subordinate officer. Sarah looked around the room, making eye contact with each person present. I don't expect special treatment because of what I've done. I don't want anyone to treat me differently because of the operations I've been part of. What I do expect is the professional respect that any officer of my rank and experience deserves, regardless of their gender or their appearance. Admiral Hayes nodded slowly, his earlier bravado completely gone. You're absolutely right, Commander. I apologize. That was unprofessional of me. Apology accepted, sir, Sarah replied, her voice softening slightly. Now, if we could return to the briefing, I believe there are some important strategic decisions that need to be made. As Sarah returned to her presentation, the dynamic in the room had completely changed. Where before there had been skepticism and barely concealed condescension, now there was genuine attention and respect. The Admiral listened intently to every word, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated his newfound appreciation for Sarah's expertise. But, even as she continued with her professional duties, Sarah couldn't help but think about the cost of respect in her chosen field. She had never wanted to reveal that part of her past, had never wanted to use her combat record as a weapon in office politics. The tattoo on her arm was a private reminder of experiences that had shaped her, not a badge to be displayed for professional advantage. Yet she knew that sometimes, in a world that still struggled to see women as capable warriors, dramatic gestures were necessary. She thought about the young female officers who would come after her, and hoped that someday they wouldn't have to prove their worth in such stark terms. For now, though, she would use whatever tools were necessary to ensure that she could do her job effectively and help save the lives of the men and women serving under her command. The briefing concluded with Admiral Hayes personally thanking Sarah for her insights and requesting additional analysis on several key points she had raised. As the other officers filed out of the room, the Admiral approached her directly. "Commander," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I respect what you've done for this country. I was wrong to make assumptions about your background, and I hope we can work together effectively going forward." Sarah nodded, accepting his words but still feeling the emotional weight of having to expose such a personal part of her history. "Thank you, Admiral. I look forward to working with you as well." As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Sarah reflected on the complex emotions swirling within her. There was satisfaction in having proven herself, but also sadness at what she had had to reveal to earn that respect. There was pride in her service, but also the ever-present shadow of the lives she had taken in the line of duty. Walking back to her office, Sarah passed several junior officers who looked at her with what seemed like newfound awareness. Word traveled fast in military circles, and she suspected that the story of what had happened in the briefing room would spread quickly. She hoped that the focus would remain on her professional qualifications rather than the more sensational details of her combat experience. That evening, alone in her quarters, Sarah looked at her reflection in the mirror as she changed out of her uniform. The tattoo on her arm was hidden again beneath civilian clothes, but she could feel its presence like a weight on her soul. Each number represented not just an enemy eliminated, but a moment when she had been forced to become someone she had never imagined she would be. She thought about her childhood in small-town Nebraska, where she had been the girl who rescued injured birds and cried when her goldfish died. That girl still existed somewhere inside her, even after everything she had experienced. The challenge was finding a way to honor both parts of herself, the compassionate young woman who had joined the Navy to serve her country, and the hardened warrior who had done whatever was necessary to protect her fellow service members. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the briefing room, and Admiral Hayes found himself unable to concentrate on routine matters. The image of Commander Mitchell's tattoo kept flashing through his mind, along with the quiet dignity with which she had delivered her revelation. He had spent 30 years in the military, had seen combat in multiple theaters, and had worked with some of the most elite warriors in the world. Yet something about that moment had shaken him to his core. The Admiral sat in his office, staring at Commander Mitchell's personnel files spread across his desk. He had requested access to her classified records, using his security clearance to delve deeper into her background. What he found there made his earlier behavior seem even more shameful. Sarah Mitchell hadn't just been a sniper, she had been one of the most effective long-range specialists in modern military history. Her first deployment had been to Afghanistan at the age of 22, fresh out of advanced training. Within 6 months, she had been recruited by a joint task force conducting high-risk operations in the most dangerous regions of the country. The reports described surgical precision, impossible shots taken under extreme conditions, and a level of tactical awareness that had saved countless American lives. Admiral Hayes read through after-action reports that painted a picture of a young woman who had adapted to the brutal realities of modern warfare with remarkable skill and unwavering professionalism. There were commendations from commanders who praised not just her marksmanship, but her ability to remain calm under pressure and her dedication to protecting her teammates at all costs. One report, filed by Colonel James Crawford, described an operation where Sarah's unit had been pinned down by enemy fire in a valley outside Kandahar. From a position over 800 meters away, she had systematically eliminated 12 enemy combatants in the span of 4 minutes, allowing her team to extract safely. Crawford had written, "Mitchell's actions under fire were nothing short of extraordinary. Her precision and composure in life-or-death situations are unmatched in my experience." But it was the psychological evaluation reports that truly opened Admiral Hayes's eyes to what Sarah had endured. After each deployment, she had undergone extensive counseling to help process the mental and emotional toll of her duties. The reports described a young woman struggling to reconcile her natural empathy and compassion with the necessity of taking human lives in combat. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the military psychologist who had worked with Sarah for 3 years, had written extensively about the unique challenges faced by female snipers. Commander Mitchell exhibits exceptional emotional resilience, one report noted, but carries a profound sense of responsibility for each life taken. She has developed sophisticated coping mechanisms that allow her to function effectively in combat while maintaining her fundamental humanity. Admiral Hayes found himself thinking about his own daughter, who was currently a junior at the Naval Academy. Emma was bright, ambitious, and determined to serve her country just as he had. He had always supported her decision, but now he wondered what challenges she would face in a military that still struggled with gender equality. Would she encounter the same skepticism and condescension that he had shown Commander Mitchell? Would she have to prove herself in ways that her male counterparts never would? The Admiral's contemplation was interrupted by a knock on his door. Lieutenant Commander Brooks entered, carrying a fresh stack of intelligence reports that required immediate attention. "Sir," Brooks began, then hesitated. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened in the briefing the other day." Admiral Hayes looked up from the files, noting the uncomfortable expression on his aide's face. "What about it, Brooks?" "Well, sir, I think Commander Mitchell deserves an apology." "A real one. What happened in that room?" Brooks paused, clearly struggling with how to address his superior officer about such a sensitive matter. "You think I was out of line," the Admiral said, completing his aide's thought. "Yes, sir, I do. Commander Mitchell is one of the most respected officers in this command. Her operational planning has been instrumental in several successful missions, and her insights have prevented numerous potential casualties. To question her qualifications based on her appearance, sir, that's exactly the kind of thinking that we're supposed to be moving beyond." Admiral Hayes leaned back in his chair, appreciating his aide's honesty even though it was difficult to hear. "You're absolutely right, Brooks. I made assumptions based on outdated prejudices, and I was wrong. The question is, how do I make it right? I think that's something you'll need to figure out yourself, sir. But I do know that Commander Mitchell has never spoken about her combat experience to anyone in this command. The fact that she felt compelled to reveal something so personal just to be taken seriously, that says something about the environment we've created here." That evening, Admiral Hayes found himself in an unusual place, the base gym at 9 o'clock at night. He had learned from Brooks that Commander Mitchell maintained a rigorous fitness routine and often worked out late to avoid the crowds. He wasn't entirely sure what he hoped to accomplish by seeking her out, but he knew that their brief exchange after the briefing hadn't been sufficient. Sarah was alone in the weight room, working through a routine that would have challenged most male officers half her age. She moved with the same precision and focus that she brought to everything else, each repetition controlled and purposeful. The Admiral watched for a moment before announcing his presence with a polite cough. "Admiral," Sarah said, pausing her workout and reaching for a towel. "This is unexpected." "Commander, I was hoping we could talk. Away from the office, away from the formal structure. Just two service members trying to understand each other." Sarah studied his face for a moment, then nodded toward a quiet corner of the gym where they could speak privately. "What's on your mind, sir?" Admiral Hayes sat down on a bench, suddenly, feeling every one of his 53 years. "I've been reading your file, Commander. Your real file, not just the sanitized version that most people see. I had no idea what you've been through, what you've accomplished. And, now that you do?" Sarah asked, her tone neutral but watchful. "Now I understand that I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you an explanation." The Admiral took a deep breath, preparing to share something he rarely discussed. "I have a daughter, Commander. She's at the academy right now, planning to follow in my footsteps. And, after what happened the other day, I keep thinking about the challenges she's going to face." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "What's her name?" "Emma. Emma Hayes. She's 21, stubborn as hell, and absolutely convinced that she's going to be the first female SEAL." I've tried to explain to her that the physical standards are different, that the culture isn't ready for women in special operations, but she won't listen. Maybe, Sarah said carefully, she's not the one who needs to listen. The Admiral looked up at her, recognizing the gentle challenge in her words. You think I'm wrong about women in special operations? I think, Sarah replied, sitting down on the opposite bench, that physical standards should be based on job requirements, not gender assumptions. I think that culture changes when leaders decide to change it. And I think that maybe Emma sees possibilities that you haven't considered yet. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight room around them filled with the quiet hum of air conditioning and distant sounds from other parts of the base. Can I ask you something? Admiral Hayes said finally. The tattoo. Why do you keep count? Sarah looked down at her forearm, hidden beneath her workout shirt. At first, it was required. My unit kept detailed records of all engagements, and confirmed kills were part of that documentation. But, after a while... She paused, searching for the right words. After a while, it became something more personal. A way of remembering that each number represents a person. Someone's son, someone's father, someone who made choices that put them on the wrong side of my rifle scope. Most snipers I know try to forget, the Admiral observed. I tried that for a while, Sarah admitted. But, forgetting felt like a betrayal. Not just to the people I killed, but to the people I was trying to protect. Each number reminds me why precision matters, why every shot has to count, why the work we do here in planning and intelligence is so important. Admiral Hayes nodded slowly, beginning to understand the depth of thought and responsibility that Sarah brought to her role. I misjudged you, Commander. Badly. You saw what you expected to see, Sarah replied without rancor. It's human nature. But, here's what I need you to understand, every female officer in this command is watching how you treat me. They're watching to see whether competence and experience matter more than gender and appearance. Your daughter is going to face these same challenges someday, and the culture she encounters will be shaped by decisions that leaders like you make right now. The Admiral felt the weight of her words, understanding that this conversation was about much more than their personal interaction. What can I do to make this right? Sarah considered the question carefully. Start by looking at the other female officers in this command. Really looking at their records, their contributions, their potential. Stop making assumptions about what women can and can't do based on stereotypes and start making decisions based on merit and performance. And, Emma, he asked. What should I tell my daughter about her goals? Tell her, Sarah said with a slight smile, that the standards are high, but they should be the same for everyone. Tell her that she'll have to work twice as hard to prove herself, which isn't fair but it's currently reality. And tell her that there are people like me who will support her every step of the way, because we want the next generation of female warriors to have better opportunities than we did. Admiral Hayes stood up, extending his hand to Sarah. Thank you, Commander. For your service, for your patience with an old fool, and for helping me understand what I need to do better. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Thank you for listening, Admiral. And for being willing to change. As they parted ways, Admiral Hayes felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about the future of the military he loved. For the first time, he was beginning to see the possibilities that his daughter Emma had been trying to show him, and he was starting to understand his role in making those possibilities reality. Walking back to his quarters, the Admiral made a mental note to call Emma later that evening. He wanted to tell her about Commander Mitchell, about the conversation they'd had, and about his newfound understanding of what she was trying to accomplish. But, more than that, he wanted to hear about her dreams and ambitions without the filter of his own preconceptions. Sarah, meanwhile, returned to her workout with a sense of cautious optimism. Change in military culture was slow and often frustrating, but tonight she had seen something in Admiral Hayes's eyes that gave her hope. Maybe, just maybe, the next generation of female officers would face fewer barriers and more opportunities. As she continued her routine, Sarah thought about the young women currently working their way through the military pipeline. She thought about the challenges they would face and the support they would need. most importantly, she thought about her responsibility to ensure that her own experiences, both positive and negative, could help pave the way for those who would come after her. The conversation with Admiral Hayes had been exhausting in its emotional intensity, but it had also been necessary. Real change required honest dialogue, even when that dialogue was uncomfortable. Sarah had learned that lesson many times during her career, and tonight had been another reminder of its truth. 2 weeks after their conversation in the gym, Admiral Hayes found himself implementing changes throughout Naval Special Warfare Command that surprised even his closest advisors. He had begun conducting personal reviews of all female personnel files, not looking for problems but for untapped potential and overlooked achievements. What he discovered both impressed and troubled him. Lieutenant Jennifer Torres had been consistently passed over for advanced training opportunities despite having the highest technical scores in her class. Captain Michelle Rodriguez had been assigned to administrative roles for 3 consecutive tours, despite her expertise in counterterrorism operations. Commander Angela Foster had requested transfer to operational planning twice, only to be told that her skills were better suited to personnel management. The pattern was clear, and Admiral Hayes realized that he had been unconsciously perpetuating a system that limited opportunities based on outdated assumptions about gender roles in combat operations. The more files he reviewed, the more convinced he became that the Navy was wasting incredible talent. His first major decision was to establish a task force focused on operational equality, with Commander Mitchell as its lead officer. The announcement sent ripples throughout the command, with reactions ranging from enthusiastic support to barely concealed skepticism. Admiral Hayes knew that real change would require more than policy adjustments, it would require a fundamental shift in culture. Sarah accepted the assignment with mixed feelings. She was honored by the Admiral's confidence but concerned about the target it might place on her back. Leading efforts to advance gender equality in the military was often a career-limiting move, regardless of how necessary the work might be. However, she also recognized the unique opportunity to create lasting change from a position of authority and respect. The task force's first meeting included 12 officers from various ranks and specialties, 6 men and 6 women. Sarah had specifically requested this composition, believing that sustainable change required buy-in from all stakeholders, not just those who would directly benefit from improved policies. Our mission, Sarah began, addressing the group assembled in the secure conference room, is to identify and eliminate barriers that prevent any qualified service member from reaching their full potential, regardless of gender. This isn't about lowering standards or implementing quotas. This is about ensuring that standards are applied fairly and that opportunities are distributed based on merit. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thompson, a decorated SEAL with 15 years of experience, raised his hand. "Commander, I respect what you're trying to do here, but I have concerns about changing systems that have worked effectively for decades. Special operations units function on trust and cohesion. Introducing social engineering could compromise that." Sarah nodded, appreciating his directness. "Thank you for that question, Lieutenant Commander. You're absolutely right that trust and cohesion are essential. But I'd argue that a system that excludes qualified personnel based on characteristics unrelated to job performance is actually what compromises effectiveness." She turned to the whiteboard and began writing. "Let's look at the current statistics. Over the past 5 years, women have comprised approximately 18% of Navy personnel but only 7% of special operations support roles and 0% of frontline special operations positions. Meanwhile, in specialized technical roles requiring similar physical and mental capabilities, women have consistently matched or exceeded performance standards." Captain Rodriguez leaned forward in her seat. "The physical standards argument is the one we always hear, but most special operations roles require a combination of physical capability, technical expertise, and tactical intelligence. The current system seems to overweight physical strength while undervaluing other crucial skills." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "And even when we look at pure physical requirements, we need to distinguish between job-relevant fitness and arbitrary benchmarks. A sniper needs exceptional hand-eye coordination, emotional control, and marksmanship skills. Upper body strength is less relevant than stability, breathing control, and patience." The discussion continued for 3 hours, with participants sharing experiences, challenging assumptions, and gradually building consensus around core principles. By the end of the session, even the most skeptical members had agreed to support a comprehensive review of current policies and practices. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself working longer hours than ever before. In addition to her regular intelligence duties, she was now coordinating research, conducting interviews, and analyzing data from multiple sources. The work was exhausting but energizing. Finally, she felt like she was making a difference beyond individual operations. One evening, as she worked late in her office reviewing training protocols, Admiral Hayes stopped by with 2 cups of coffee and an unexpected revelation. "Commander," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk, "I wanted to update you on something. I called my daughter Emma last week to tell her about our conversation and the changes we're implementing here." Sarah looked up from her computer, curious about his expression, which seemed to combine pride with concern. "How did she react?" "She told me something I never knew," the Admiral said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Apparently, she's been facing harassment at the Academy. Not just casual comments or jokes, but serious harassment. Other midshipmen questioning her commitment, suggesting she's only there because of quotas, making her daily life miserable." Sarah felt a familiar anger rise in her chest. "How long has this been going on?" "According to Emma, since her first year. She never told me because she was afraid I would either dismiss it as part of the normal hazing process or try to intervene in ways that would make things worse for her." Admiral Hayes ran his hand through his graying hair. "I realized that I'd been so focused on the big picture of her career that I never asked about the day-to-day reality of her experience." "What did you tell her?" "I told her about you," the Admiral replied. "About your service record, about the respect you've earned, about the changes we're working on here." For the first time in months, she sounded hopeful about her future in the Navy. Sarah set down her coffee, understanding the deeper implications of what Admiral Hayes was sharing. "Admiral, your daughter's experience isn't unique. Every female service member has stories like that. The question is what we do with that knowledge." "I've been thinking about that," he said. "I want to expand our task force's mission. Instead of just focusing on special operations, I want to look at the entire pipeline from the academy through advanced training. I want to identify where harassment occurs and implement real consequences for those who engage in it." Sarah nodded slowly, recognizing both the ambition and the challenges of such an undertaking. "That's a significant expansion of scope. It will require resources, political support, and buy-in from leadership at multiple levels." "I know," Admiral Hayes replied. "But, after talking to Emma, I realized that all the policy changes in the world won't matter if we don't address the underlying culture that makes female service members feel unwelcome and unsupported." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Lieutenant Torres entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Commander Mitchell," she said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to speak with you about something important." "Of course," Sarah replied, gesturing for Torres to take a seat. "What's on your mind?" Torres glanced at Admiral Hayes, who nodded encouragingly. "I heard about the task force you're leading, and I wanted to volunteer to help. But I also wanted to share something that might be relevant to your work." She took a deep breath before continuing. 3 months ago, I applied for advanced sniper training. I scored in the top 5% on all written examinations and exceeded physical fitness standards. But I was rejected for the program. When I asked for feedback, I was told that the instructors felt I might not be able to handle the psychological pressure of combat operations. Sarah and Admiral Hayes exchanged glances, both recognizing the implications of what Torres was describing. "Did they provide any specific examples of deficiencies in your performance?" Sarah asked. "No, ma'am. In fact, my psychological evaluations were all positive. My instructors in basic marksmanship praised my composure and focus. The rejection seemed to be based entirely on assumptions about my gender rather than my demonstrated capabilities." Admiral Hayes leaned forward, his expression serious. "Lieutenant Torres, would you be willing to have your case reviewed by our task force? Not as a way to reverse the decision, but as a case study that might help us identify systemic problems in the selection process? Yes, sir, Torres replied without hesitation. If my experience can help prevent other qualified women from facing similar barriers, I'm happy to share whatever information might be useful. After Torres left, Sarah and Admiral Hayes continued their discussion with a new sense of urgency. It was becoming clear that the problems they were trying to address were more pervasive and deeply rooted than either of them had initially realized. Commander, the Admiral said as their meeting drew to a close, I want you to know that you have my full support in this effort. Whatever resources you need, whatever political battles we have to fight, I'm committed to seeing this through. Sarah appreciated his words, but she also understood the challenges that lay ahead. Thank you, Admiral. I just hope we can create enough momentum to make lasting change before we encounter serious resistance from those who prefer the status quo. We will, Admiral Hayes replied with conviction. Because we have something that the status quo doesn't, we have the truth on our side, and we have qualified people who are ready to prove what they can accomplish when given the opportunity. As Sarah returned to her work that evening, she felt a growing sense of purpose that extended far beyond her individual career. The task force was beginning to uncover systemic issues that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Each conversation, each case study, and each policy review revealed new examples of wasted talent and missed opportunities. But, more than that, she was starting to see signs that the culture itself might be ready for change. Admiral Hayes' transformation from skeptic to advocate wasn't unique. Other senior leaders were beginning to ask difficult questions about their own assumptions and practices. The real test would come when their findings and recommendations were presented to Navy leadership. Sarah knew that proposing significant changes to military culture and policy would generate controversy and resistance. However, she also knew that the current system was unsustainable in an era when the military needed to attract and retain the best talent available, regardless of gender. As she worked late into the night, Sarah thought about Emma Hayes and Jennifer Torres and all the other young women who were fighting for the opportunity to serve their country to the fullest extent of their abilities. Their success or failure would depend partly on the work being done by the task force, but ultimately it would depend on the courage of leaders throughout the military to embrace change and champion equality. The stakes had never felt higher, and Sarah was determined not to let them down. 6 months after the formation of the task force, Commander Sarah Mitchell stood before a panel of admirals and senior Pentagon officials, preparing to present findings that could reshape the future of naval special operations. The secure briefing room was filled with some of the most powerful leaders in the military, and Sarah could feel the weight of expectation and skepticism in equal measure. Admiral Hayes had fought hard to secure this presentation opportunity, calling in favors and making personal appeals to ensure that the task force's work would receive serious consideration at the highest levels. The stakes were enormous. Success could mean revolutionary changes in military policy, while failure might set back progress on gender equality for years to come. Admirals and distinguished colleagues, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Over the past 6 months, our task force has conducted the most comprehensive analysis of gender integration in naval special operations ever undertaken. Our findings challenge fundamental assumptions about capability, performance, and the nature of military effectiveness itself. She clicked to her first slide, which displayed stark statistics about current gender representation across various military specialties. As you can see, women currently comprise less than 8% of personnel in special operations support roles and 0% in direct action positions. However, when we examined performance metrics for roles requiring similar skill sets in other contexts, we found no statistically significant differences in capability between male and female personnel. Admiral Patricia Williams, one of the highest-ranking women in Navy leadership, leaned forward with interest. Commander Mitchell, can you elaborate on the specific metrics you examined? Certainly, ma'am, Sarah replied, advancing to a detailed chart. We analyzed performance data from sniper training, intelligence analysis, technical operations, and high-stress decision-making scenarios. In every category, qualification rates and performance scores showed no meaningful correlation with gender. The primary determinant of success was individual aptitude and training quality. Admiral Robert Chen, known for his traditional views on military structure, raised his hand. Commander, these statistics are interesting, But special operations require more than technical skills. Unit cohesion, physical endurance under extreme conditions, and psychological resilience are factors that might not show up in your data. Sarah had anticipated this challenge and was prepared with a comprehensive response. You're absolutely correct, Admiral Chen, which is why we also conducted field studies with mixed-gender teams in controlled environments. We found that teams with diverse composition actually outperformed homogeneous teams in complex problem-solving scenarios and demonstrated greater adaptability in unexpected situations. She clicked to the next slide, which showed video footage from training exercises. This footage is from a counter-terrorism simulation conducted at our training facility. The team you're watching includes 2 female operators who were selected based purely on performance criteria. As you can see, their tactical awareness and execution are indistinguishable from their male counterparts. The room fell silent as the footage played, showing the mixed-gender team moving with precision through a simulated hostage rescue scenario. Their coordination was flawless, their communication efficient, and their execution professional. When the exercise concluded successfully, several of the observing officials shifted in their seats, clearly reconsidering their preconceptions. Admiral Hayes, who had been watching the reactions around the room, stepped forward. I want to add something personal to Commander Mitchell's presentation. 6 months ago, I was one of the skeptics in this room. I believed that women simply weren't suited for special operations roles, and I made that belief known in ways that I now regret. His honesty drew surprised glances from several colleagues who knew his reputation as a traditional military leader. Commander Mitchell not only proved me wrong through her own exceptional service record, but she helped me understand that my assumptions were limiting our military's effectiveness. We are literally turning away qualified warriors because of prejudices that have no basis in operational reality. Sarah clicked to a slide showing recruitment and retention statistics. This brings us to a critical strategic consideration. The military is facing unprecedented challenges in attracting top-tier talent, particularly in technical specialties. Meanwhile, we are systematically excluding approximately half the population from our most elite units, despite evidence that many of these individuals possess exactly the capabilities we need. Admiral Williams nodded thoughtfully. What specific policy changes are you recommending? Our recommendations fall into 3 categories, Sarah replied, advancing to a summary slide. First, implementation of gender-neutral performance standards based on job-specific requirements rather than arbitrary benchmarks. Second, establishment of zero-tolerance policies for harassment and discrimination, with meaningful consequences for violations. Third, creation of mentorship and advancement programs that ensure qualified personnel have equal access to career-developing opportunities. Admiral Chan looked skeptical. Commander, these changes would represent a fundamental shift in military culture. How do we ensure that standards don't decline in the name of equality? Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this exact question. Admiral, our proposal actually raises standards by focusing on mission-critical capabilities rather than irrelevant criteria. For example, current physical fitness tests often emphasize upper body strength, even for roles where marksmanship, endurance, and tactical intelligence are more important. Our recommended standards would better predict actual job performance. The questioning continued for another hour, with each official probing different aspects of the proposal. Sarah fielded every question with detailed data and careful reasoning, while Admiral Hayes provided strategic context and leadership perspective. Gradually, the tone of the discussion shifted from skepticism to serious consideration of implementation challenges. Admiral David Martinez, the senior official present, finally called for a brief recess. As the official stepped out to confer, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and anticipation that followed high-stakes presentations. Admiral Hayes approached her with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "That was exceptional work, Commander," he said quietly. "Regardless of the outcome, you've given them a lot to think about." When the officials returned, Admiral Martinez addressed the room with formal gravity. "Commander Mitchell, Admiral Hayes, we want to thank you for this comprehensive analysis. While we recognize that implementing these recommendations will require significant institutional changes, we believe the strategic arguments you've presented are compelling. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she waited for the crucial decision. Therefore, Admiral Martinez continued, "We are authorizing a 2-year pilot program that will implement your recommendations on a limited scale. Commander Mitchell, we would like you to oversee this program's development and execution. Admiral Hayes, we're counting on your leadership to ensure successful integration within Naval Special Warfare Command." The room erupted in quiet conversations as officials discussed the implications of this unprecedented decision. Sarah felt a mixture of elation and trepidation. They had won approval for their proposals, but now came the even more challenging task of proving that the changes would work in practice. Over the following weeks, news of the pilot program spread throughout the military community, generating reactions that ranged from enthusiastic support to fierce opposition. Sarah found herself at the center of a national debate about gender roles, military effectiveness, and the pace of social change. The media attention was both helpful and problematic. Supportive coverage helped build public backing for the program, but hostile commentary created additional pressure and scrutiny. Sarah learned to navigate interviews carefully, always emphasizing competence and mission effectiveness rather than social justice arguments. 3 months into implementation, the first female candidates began entering previously restricted training programs. Lieutenant Torres was among the initial group, and her progress was closely monitored by supporters and critics alike. When she successfully completed sniper training with the second highest scores in her class, the achievement made national news. Admiral Hayes called Sarah to his office the day Torres graduated. "I just got off the phone with my daughter Emma," he said with obvious pride. "She wanted me to tell you that Lieutenant Torres has become something of a hero at the academy." Applications from female midshipmen for special operations tracks have increased by 40% this year. Sarah smiled, understanding the broader significance of Torres's success. Individual achievements like hers are important, but the real test will be whether we can sustain these changes over time and across the entire institution. Speaking of sustainability, Admiral Hayes said, producing an official document, "I have news about your next assignment. The Pentagon wants to expand the pilot program to other service branches. They're offering you a promotion to captain and assignment to a joint task force that would implement similar changes throughout the Department of Defense." Sarah stared at the papers, recognizing the magnitude of the opportunity and responsibility being offered. "Admiral, I'm honored, but I also understand what accepting this assignment would mean. I'd become the public face of military gender integration, with all the scrutiny and controversy that entails." "You would," Admiral Hayes agreed. "But you'd also be in a position to create lasting change that affects every service member for generations to come. The question is whether you're ready for that level of responsibility and visibility." Sarah thought about her journey from a young woman in Nebraska who wanted to serve her country to a combat veteran who had proven herself in the most demanding circumstances. She thought about Emma Hayes and Jennifer Torres and all the other women who were fighting for the opportunity to reach their full potential in military service. "I accept," she said simply. As news of Sarah's promotion and new assignment spread, she received congratulations from colleagues throughout the military. But the message that meant the most came from an unexpected source, a handwritten note from Emma Hayes, who was now in her final year at the Naval Academy. "Commander Mitchell," the note read, "I wanted to thank you for showing me that excellence speaks louder than prejudice, and that real change comes from people who are willing to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. Because of leaders like you, my generation will inherit a military that values capability over gender, and performance over stereotypes. I hope to serve with honor in the Navy you're helping to create." Sarah kept that note on her desk as she prepared for her new role, a reminder of why the work mattered and who would benefit from its success. The challenges ahead would be enormous. Expanding the pilot program would require navigating complex political dynamics, overcoming institutional resistance, and proving critics wrong through consistent results. But Sarah had learned throughout her career that the most important missions were often the most difficult ones. Just as she had once looked through a rifle scope and taken precise action to protect her fellow warriors, she was now taking aim at systemic barriers that limited the military's effectiveness and denied opportunities to qualified service members. As she cleaned out her office at Naval Special Warfare Command, Sarah reflected on the remarkable transformation she had witnessed over the past year. Admiral Hayes had evolved from a skeptic to a champion of change. Lieutenant Torres had shattered assumptions about female capabilities in special operations. Most importantly, the culture itself had begun to shift toward merit-based evaluation and inclusive excellence. The pilot program was just the beginning. Sarah knew that real, lasting change would require years of sustained effort, constant vigilance against backsliding, and continued proof that equality enhanced rather than compromised military effectiveness. But, for the first time in her career, she felt genuinely optimistic about the future facing young women who wanted to serve their country in the most demanding roles the military had to offer. Walking out of the building where her transformation from combat operator to change agent had begun, Sarah thought about the tattoo hidden beneath her uniform sleeve. Those 47 marks would always remind her of the gravity of military service and the ultimate stakes of the profession she had chosen. But now they also served as a reminder that precision and determination could be applied to targets beyond the battlefield, that the same qualities that made her an effective sniper could make her an effective advocate for justice and equality. The future was uncertain, but Sarah was ready to take aim at whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that her success or failure would influence the opportunities available to countless others who shared her commitment to serving their country with honor and distinction.